The New York Giants already have to replace two coordinators this offseason. Could they end up having to replace all three? Ed Valentine of Big Blue View here with your Valentine's Views podcast for Monday as we continue to talk New York Giants football as we just sort of begin rolling into the 2024 NFL offseason. Please like, share, and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts across the Big Blue View Radio Network. Let's talk a little bit about Giants offensive coordinator Mike Kafka. For me, what happens with Kafka at this point is one of the more intriguing stories of the offseason when it comes to the Giants coaching staff. We know that Brian Daboll fired special teams coordinator Thomas McGahee and is looking for a replacement there. Giants and defensive coordinator Wink Martindale parted ways under fairly acrimonious circumstances. And we've talked about that. I've written about that a lot at Big Blue View. But sort of under the surface here is what might happen with offensive coordinator Mike Kafka. He's still a member of the Giants coaching staff. The Giants have said, and Brian Daboll specifically said at his season-ending press conference, that he expects Kafka to be back. His plan is for Kafka to be back. However, I do not believe that just because that is the plan, that is the expectation, and that as I record this show on January 21st, that's the plan. I don't believe that there's certainty that Kafka will return to the Giants in 2024. First of all, Kafka, despite the Giants' struggles on offense in 2023, Kafka is obviously still a hot name in NFL coaching circles. Kafka had 4 interviews for head coaching jobs around the NFL in last season's hiring cycle. So far this year, the Giants' struggles on offense have not really impacted his possibilities as an NFL head coach. He's gotten 2 more interviews for head coaching jobs. So NFL teams still view Kafka as a young, bright, up-and-coming offensive mind. And those are the kinds of guys who are largely getting NFL head coaching opportunities these days. Kafka fits the mold. NFL teams are still interested. So to me, it doesn't look like Kafka is going to get one of the head coaching jobs in this cycle, but that doesn't mean that he won't have opportunities to move on. If you've been following the news, you know that Kafka was named head coach of one of the teams in the upcoming East-West Shrine Bowl. That all-star game will give him an opportunity to get a close-up look at some players, which, if he stays with the Giants, is a big benefit for the Giants. Will give him an opportunity to be a head coach, albeit in an all-star kind of circumstance, not in an NFL equivalent circumstance. But it will also give Kafka an opportunity to network. There will be a lot of NFL people around, scouts, GMs, all kinds of other coaches. It will give Kafka an opportunity to talk to people around the league, to sort of put out feelers to find out what other openings might be available around the league. And I would fully expect him to do that. As NFL teams begin to hire head coaches, the Las Vegas Raiders on Friday hired Antonio Pierce as their head coach. There are still several openings around the league. As we begin to get clarity on who's going to fill the various openings around the league, those coaches will have to fill out their own coaching staffs. I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that some of those head coaches will look at Mike Kafka and ask the Giants for permission to interview Kafka for their offensive coordinator vacancies. Obviously, should Kafka not get one of the two head coaching jobs that he's interviewed for at this point. That, to me, is where it begins to get interesting. Will the Giants allow Kafka to interview for what would be a lateral job? NFL teams are not required to do that. We've seen that several times already as the Giants have requested permission to interview coaches for their special teams opening. They've been rejected, I think, 3 times by teams who they've asked permission to speak to their special teams coordinator about moving to the Giants. Teams have that right. Some teams allow it. Some teams will hold their coaches, hold their assistant coaches until a new coach is hired to give that new head coach an opportunity to talk about possibly bringing those coaches on his own staff. So each team approaches that differently. And when it comes to the lateral move, you don't know what you don't know what's going to happen when you ask. How would the Giants approach that situation if if teams request that Kafka interview with them? I don't know. I suspect, to be honest, that the Giants would allow Kafka to do that. And for me, as I said, this is where it begins to get interesting. There were, throughout the 2023 season, there were reports that at times Brian Daboll took play calling away from Mike Kafka. There were reports that at times Daboll took over control of the offense behind the scenes during practices and meetings in terms of building out game plans and things like that. There were reports that through midseason, Daboll did that for several weeks. So you're looking at a situation also where heading into year 3, there has been some chatter, some reporting that Brian Daboll, formerly a highly successful offensive coordinator, might, and we don't know this for sure, but might want to take over control of the offense himself. And honestly, I wouldn't be shocked by that. The Giants weren't good on offense in 2023. There is a strong possibility that the Giants will draft a young quarterback, whether that be someone like Jaden Daniels in the first round, whether that be someone on day 2 who they might want to try to develop into a potential replacement for Daniel Jones. But there's a strong possibility that there would be a young quarterback to develop in the quarterback room for the Giants in 2024. And my guess is that Brian Daboll, who has done this before with young quarterbacks, largely responsible for the development of Josh Allen, worked with other young quarterbacks throughout his career, worked with Tua Tagovailoa in Alabama, worked with Jalen Hurts there too. But there's a possibility that Daboll would want to take over the full control of the offense. Now, if he does that, why would Mike Kafka really want to stay on? Kafka is a guy who came out of Kansas City 2 years ago, looked at as a fast rising head coach, moved out of Kansas City for the simple reason that what he needed to do to advance his own career was to get away from Andy Reid, to get out from under the shadow of both Reid and Eric Bieniemy, get to a situation where he could call his own plays, where he could be an offensive coordinator. He's been getting interviews for head coaching jobs. He's still looked at around the league as a rising coach. For Mike Kafka to be forced to step back as an offensive coordinator into a situation where he had the title offensive coordinator but didn't have play calling responsibilities would not advance his career at all. It would not be a step. It would be a step backward for him. And I'm certain, although Kafka hasn't told me this personally. I'm certain that if Mike Kafka can avoid being in that situation, he's going to want to avoid being in that situation. And I think my gut feeling is that if Brian Daboll wants control of the offense, wants to do that himself, that he would allow Kafka to interview for other offensive coordinator jobs. But I don't know that for a fact, and we don't know that for certain until we actually see it happen. So in that case, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Kafka moves on, if he has an opportunity. I've kind of always felt like if Mike Kafka has a chance to move on, he'll move on. I never looked at Kafka as an assistant coach who would be with the Giants for the long term. He was always a riser. He was always a guy who was Wink Martindale used to call the Giants a destination. I'm not sure that Mike Kafka ever looked at it that way. I think that Kafka always looked at this job as a stepping stone. And if the step for him in 2024 with the Giants is going to be backward, why would he stay if he has an opportunity not to? And as for the tension, reported tension between Kafka and Daboll, I don't know what's true. I don't know what isn't true. I do know that Brian Daboll tried very, very hard in 2023 to allow Kafka to do what Kafka felt was right, to stay out of Kafka's way in terms of calling plays and things like that. But the 2023 season didn't go as well as anyone would have liked. And of course, tensions get higher, and Daboll knows his own background and his own strength and what he wants. And it's no surprise that he became more involved in the offense. So we'll see how all of that plays out, but very, very interesting. And I think that as I've said, although Daboll has said he expects Kafka to be back, would not be surprised in any way, shape, or form if Mike Kafka moves on. What do the Giants do at offensive coordinator if Kafka does move on? Obviously, as I said, I think Brian Daboll takes control of the offense. I personally prefer head coaches to be more of the sort of CEO type, not necessarily calling plays on either side of the ball, but knowing Daboll's background, knowing that he's been successful as an offensive coordinator, knowing the situation the Giants are likely to be in offensively, and the fact that there will be some heat on Daboll entering the third year of his coaching tenure with the Giants. I wouldn't be surprised at all if that is something that Daboll wants to do. What the Giants do at offensive coordinator, I think, is pretty cut and dry. Quarterbacks coach Shea Tierney has been a long-time trusted Brian Daboll assistant. Worked with Brian Daboll all the way back in Daboll's days at Alabama. I think that was 2017 when Daboll was at Alabama, and Tierney was there as an assistant for Daboll on the offensive side of the ball. Tierney followed Daboll to Buffalo as an assistant, then followed Daboll to the Giants. So I think it's pretty clear that Brian Daboll has respect for Shea Tierney, that Tierney is a quote unquote Daboll guy. And I think that it's pretty clear that if Brian Daboll takes control of the offense and Mike Kafka moves on, that Shea Tierney would advance to the offensive coordinator title, probably without play calling, at least initially. Maybe down the line, Daboll would turn play calling back over to Tierney. We'll have to see how that plays out. But I think that sort of succession plan, if you want to call it that, is pretty clear that that is how it would work out if Kafka were to move on. All right, just a a couple of quick thoughts on the Giants' search for a defensive coordinator. Giants have held a few interviews. Obviously, we'll hold more interviews. We know some of the candidates. We know Jerome Henderson. We know Denard Wilson. We know a few of the other guys. Have been running a tracker at Big Blue View about all of the coaching information. And I keep being asked what I would really like in a defensive coordinator. And for me, it's mostly about the person. It's not about, do you run an aggressive scheme, or do you run a blitzing scheme? Do you run a coverage oriented scheme? All of that. For me, it's about getting the right person, getting a guy who can sell what he wants, what kind of scheme he wants to run to the defensive players, a guy who can coach it, a guy who can relate to players, a guy who can motivate players. I think it's risky for Brian Daboll to turn the job over to someone who's never called plays before. Not that that can't work, but I think if I had my preference, I would prefer someone who's done it before. Although I'll be honest, I would love to see Giants defensive backs coach Jerome Henderson, who has never been a defensive coordinator. Would love to see Henderson get an opportunity to fill that role with the Giants or elsewhere at some point in time. I think he's earned it. Don't know how seriously the Giants would consider giving that job to Henderson, but I do have reservations about giving the job to someone who's never done it before, just because of the unknown, obviously. So we'll see what happens there. The one thing that I do think, my own personal preference would be that the Giants not give the job to a coordinator who would come in and want to change the Giants front to a 4-3. And listen, you can argue what's better, 4-3, 3-4. And I'm not here to do that. I'm not here to debate the merits of one over the other. It depends on your philosophy. It depends on how you want to use players. My thing is this. I think that the Giants have, for the last few years now, especially the last 2 years under Joe Shane, and even before that under Dave Gettleman, Patrick Graham ran a different type of 4-3 or 3-4 defense than Wink Martindale did. He ran a coverage-oriented 3-4 where he didn't blitz a lot, where he tried to disguise coverages, confuse quarterbacks that way. Martindale just wanted to pressure and intimidate quarterbacks and wreak havoc that way. What both guys had in common was that their philosophies were based in the 3-4. They were based in being multiple. They're based in using a nose tackle, having stand-up edge guys. So what I think we have with the New York Giants is the Giants have personnel on their front seven that are geared toward the 3-4. And for me, there's less of a learning curve. There's less of a situation where you really have to change the personnel if you are able to stay with someone who wants to base their philosophy, base their scheme off that 3-4 or off the ability to be multiple. The Giants have, they moved Dexter Lawrence to the nose, and he's become an all-pro player in the last 2 years. The two defensive tackles they drafted, DJ Davidson and Jordan Riley, are both 3-4 nose type defensive tackles. They've brought in Bobby Okereke, who's inside linebacker, who's been successful in the 3-4, also played that in Indianapolis. Kayvon Thibodeau and Azeez Ojulari were drafted as 3-4 edge guys. So the people that they have, the personnel that they have, is oriented toward that 3-4 scheme. And I would hope that the Giants take that into strong consideration as they look for a new defensive coordinator. All right, Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please stay safe out there, take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.